Medieval justice was basically improv night with swords, and somehow everyone got executed for it. 1. No bathing without a doctor's note. In 14th century Europe, some cities banned public bathing entirely because they thought warm water opened your pores and your soul to demons. In Paris, bathhouses were seen as dens of sin and moist gateways to moral decay. So if you wanted a bath, you technically needed medical justification, and even then, only lukewarm, because heaven forbid you enjoy it. Nobles started bragging about not bathing as a sign of purity, which is how smelling like power became horrifyingly literal. One chronicler even wrote that Queen Isabella smelled of sanctity, which we now know is medieval PR for Febreze hadn't been invented yet. 2. The duck test for witchcraft. Forget logic. Medieval courts preferred waterboarding as a diagnostic tool. The ordeal by water worked like this: tie up an accused witch and throw her into a river. If she floated, she was guilty, possessed by Satan's buoyancy. If she sank, she was innocent, but also, drowned. A flawless system. Local priests even kept ledgers of successful tests, as if the drowning rate was a KPI. Some towns made a carnival out of it: vendors, music, snacks, because nothing says family fun day like casual homicide and roasted chestnuts. 3. No shoes for peasants. In several medieval kingdoms, laws restricted commoners from wearing fancy shoes. The longer your shoe's toes, the higher your status. Nobles strutted around in ridiculous pointy shoes called poulains that could be 2 feet long, literally tied to their knees so they wouldn't trip over their own vanity. Meanwhile, peasants were legally required to keep their footwear humble. Some regions even fined farmers if their shoes looked too nice, because apparently the worst thing in feudal Europe was a stylish serf. So yes, there were knights in armor tripping over their clown shoes while peasants were getting arrested for good arch support. 4. The don't die before the king law. In medieval Denmark, dying at the wrong time could literally get your family fined. If a noble or official died while owing loyalty or taxes to the crown, before completing his feudal obligations, his heirs had to pay a death fine for his bad timing. Imagine grieving your father while a royal tax collector leans over the coffin asking, "So, when can we expect payment?" One recorded case involved a knight whose widow was billed because he died inconveniently before harvest. Translation: the king didn't get his money. In medieval law, even your funeral had to be fiscally responsible. 5. No women at dinner. Unless they were silent in certain English towns during the 13th century, local tavern laws prohibited women from speaking at dinner if men were present. Apparently, conversation was considered a male privilege, the medieval version of manspreading, but for words. Breaking the rule could get a woman fined, whipped, or thrown out into the street for mouth misconduct. One chronicler wrote that a particularly talkative barmaid was punished for her unrestrained wit. Translation: she won an argument, and they couldn't handle it. So yes, medieval gender equality meant you could serve the beer. You just couldn't comment on how bad it tasted. 6. The pig on trial. In 1386, France, a pig was publicly executed for murder. Yes, a pig. It had supposedly killed a child, and the local court treated the case like any other criminal trial. There was a judge, a defense attorney, and even a custom-made pig-sized outfit for the hanging. The animal was found guilty and executed in the town square while townspeople cheered. This wasn't an isolated case. Cows, goats, and even roosters were sometimes tried for crimes. Because, when in doubt, medieval Europe preferred to litigate livestock rather than question its own sanity. 7. Don't eat mice on Fridays. In the 12th century, monks were forbidden from eating meat on Fridays, but the rule didn't specify what counted as meat. So, being the creative theologians they were, some monks classified beavers, otters, and yes, mice as fish. Their logic? They lived near water. Problem solved. One monastery cookbook even lists mouse stew under Lenten recipes, which is possibly the worst sentence in culinary history. Somewhere, a monk was stirring a cauldron thinking, technically, it swims. Thus began the world's first legal loophole-based diet plan, the pescatarian of desperation. 8. The no hat on Sunday rule. In 14th century Italy, fashion got so out of control that city councils began legislating style. Bologna banned extravagant hats on Sundays because the people's pride overshadowed the sanctity of worship. The rule meant you could wear your elaborate, feathered, jewel-encrusted monstrosity 6 days a week. But if you strutted into church looking like a walking chandelier, you'd get fined. The city even hired fashion inspectors to patrol the pews, measuring hat height like divine TSA agents. Somewhere between vanity and piety, the medieval world accidentally invented the world's first dress code. 9. The Don't Insult the Bread Law. In 13th century France, bread wasn't just food, it was sacred property. So sacred, in fact, that insulting it could land you in jail. Bakers who sold loaves too small or uneven risked public humiliation and flogging, but customers weren't off the hook either. Calling a loaf ugly or unfit for supper could be considered blasphemy. One chronicler even records a man fined for mocking a baguette's shape. Imagine getting arrested for roast-level humor about carbs. They'd literally make you kneel in the square and apologize to the bread. Somewhere between starvation and superstition, medieval Europe invented the world's first gluten sensitivity to criticism. 10. No napping in church. It's a sin. Apparently, God could forgive murder, but not a quick snooze during Mass. Falling asleep in church was legally punishable in parts of medieval England and Spain. The theory was that a nap was a sign of spiritual weakness, proof you'd let the devil lull you into sloth. Church officials employed wake men, assistants who patrolled the pews with long sticks. If someone nodded off, they'd get a sharp poke to the ribs or a splash of cold water. One bishop in York even bragged that his parish was free of sleepers for 3 months. Honestly, that's not a church service. That's a hostage situation with incense. 11. The goose tax. Leave it to medieval bureaucrats to look at a farmyard and think, how can we monetize this? In 14th century Germany, towns imposed a literal goose tax. Every autumn, peasants had to pay their landlord 1 live goose per household. Failure to do so was a finable offense, but it didn't stop there. Some villages had goose audits, where officials inspected the birds to ensure they were of fair size and feather. Imagine an accountant holding a clipboard judging your poultry like it's the SATs. If your goose was underweight, you owed a second one. The phrase, "your goose is cooked," wasn't just an idiom, it was tax season. 12. The law against dying in church. In 13th century Spain and parts of France, it was illegal to die inside a church. Why? Because it complicated the paperwork. The church didn't want to be held financially responsible for burial costs, and local officials claimed corpses disrupted the sanctity of worship. So if you were old or sick and dared to attend Mass, priests might actually kick you out. There are recorded cases of elderly parishioners being dragged outside mid-sermon just in case they decided to expire near the altar. It's the only time in history where someone shouted, "Get out! You're dying too loudly," and it counted as holy service. 13. The No Long Lunches Law. In medieval London, workers could literally be arrested for taking too long at lunch. City officials noticed that masons and carpenters were disappearing for hours in the middle of the day, so they passed a law restricting meal breaks to 30 minutes, half an hour, to eat, pray, and avoid starvation. Inspectors would roam the streets with hourglasses like medieval HR reps, timing your bite of bread. If you lingered too long, you were fined for idleness. Nothing says progress like policing sandwich speed. Honestly, these people lived through the plague and still had micromanagers. 14. The Forbidden Fork. When forks first arrived in Europe from Byzantium, the church called them an instrument of the devil. Apparently, using a metal prong to eat food was considered an insult to God's natural design, because he gave you fingers, so use them. One Venetian noblewoman was denounced by her bishop for daring to use a golden fork at dinner. When she later died of illness, he literally said it was divine punishment for her sin of arrogance. So yes, medieval people could die of plague, famine, or poor table manners. It's the only era where fine dining came with an exorcism warning. 15. The Barber Surgeon Lottery. Barbers in the Middle Ages weren't just cutting hair. They were performing surgeries, amputations, and dentistry between shaves. Laws actually required them to display bloodied rags outside their shops as proof of their medical activity. Imagine getting a trim while the guy next to you is having a tooth yanked out with the same pliers. Regulations were so vague that some barbers ran literal surgery lotteries, drawing lots to decide whether you got a haircut or a minor operation that day. the spinning red and white barber pole, it started as a symbol for blood and bandages, because nothing says style like a fresh artery. 16. The no dancing on Sundays rule. In 15th century Scotland and England, Sunday wasn't just for rest, it was for repression. Town officials passed strict Sabbath laws, banning dancing, singing, and even playing musical instruments. In one Scottish village, a man was fined for moving rhythmically in public. They didn't even call it dancing. They called it the devil's sway. Meanwhile, taverns stayed open but had to serve beer in silence, turning Sunday drinking into a weird mime convention. Basically, the medieval church invented the first no-fun zone. 17. The trial by cheese. Some medieval courts used what they called judicium cassae, the judgment of cheese. A priest accused of lying would have to eat a piece of consecrated cheese blessed by holy water. If he choked, he was guilty. If he didn't, he was innocent. That's it. Justice by dairy. Monks reportedly spent hours debating which cheese was the most divine. Some preferred aged cheddar, others went with goat's cheese for purity. The practice was later banned because too many people died from choking, proving that lactose intolerance was, at one point, a legal defense. 18. The beer purity police. Before there were food inspectors, there were beer inspectors. In medieval Germany, brewing was sacred business, and towns passed beer purity laws so strict they make modern FDA standards look lazy. The Reinheitsgebot of 1516 declared that beer could only contain 3 ingredients: barley, hops, and water. If a brewer cheated with herbs or fruit, the punishment ranged from heavy fines to, no joke, execution. Inspectors would walk into taverns, order a pint, and publicly pour it out to test its foam height. If it didn't froth properly, you could lose your license, or your head. Today's craft brewers would have lasted about 10 minutes. 19. The Don't Wear Purple Law. Purple was the medieval equivalent of a Rolex, and governments made sure only the rich could flaunt it. Sumptuary laws banned peasants from wearing certain colors or fabrics that were reserved for nobles. In England, only royalty could wear purple silk or gold thread. A tailor once got 6 months in jail for sewing velvet sleeves on a farmer's tunic. These laws were so detailed they even specified who could wear fur and which animal it came from. Imagine being arrested for fashion plagiarism. It's the medieval version of trademark infringement, only with more beheadings. 20. The No Kissing in Public Decree. In 15th century Venice, a city famous for romance, public kissing was outlawed. Officials claimed it spread disease, but mostly, they thought it was scandalous. The penalty wasn't just a fine, it could be exile. Guards literally patrolled piazzas to break up couples mid-smooch. One man caught kissing his fiancée on a gondola was forced to stand in the square holding a sign that read, "I have sinned with lips unholy." Venice banned public affection, yet still hosted the world's most decadent masked balls, because nothing says moral consistency like punishing kissing and celebrating orgies in the same week. 21. The Don't Feed the Monks Law. In 13th century England, monasteries were basically the medieval equivalent of Costco. Everyone wanted free samples. Pilgrims, beggars, and even nobles would show up claiming holy hunger just to score a free meal. Things got so out of hand that Parliament passed laws forbidding civilians from donating food to monks. The reasoning? Monks were getting too fat and lazy. Imagine the King's Council sitting around discussing the national emergency of chunky clergy. Chronicles describe abbots sneaking roast goose into the cloisters under blankets, pretending it was spiritual nourishment. In short, God may have forgiven gluttony, but the government didn't. 22. The Goose Whistle Law. In medieval London, it was illegal to walk your geese through the city without a special license and, yes, a whistle. Goose herders were required by law to carry a wooden pipe that produced a specific tone to alert traffic. City guards would fine you if your goose whistle was out of tune, or if you herded birds too aggressively. There's even a record of a man jailed for reckless honking. This was centuries before cars, but apparently London traffic has always been a nightmare, just with more feathers. 23. The Law of Accidental Saints. During the Middle Ages, canonizing saints got weirdly bureaucratic. Sometimes local officials declared someone a saint just because the paperwork got lost. In 14th century France, a man named Robert of Bari was worshipped as a saint for over a century because no one noticed the Vatican had never approved it. Pilgrims built a shrine, merchants sold St. Bob candles, and even the clergy played along. When Rome finally found out, they revoked his sainthood. But the locals refused. So technically, England's only unofficial saint is a guy who got promoted by clerical typo. Divine intervention? Nope, just medieval HR forgetting to hit send. 24. The No Turnip Smuggling Act. Peasants in medieval Germany loved turnips, so much that stealing them became an actual epidemic. Fields were guarded like banks. Eventually, nobles passed the Turnip Smuggling Act, declaring that anyone caught sneaking root vegetables across property lines could lose a hand. One noble even trained dogs specifically to sniff out contraband turnips. Picture an entire legal system obsessed with vegetable theft. Farmers swore oaths over piles of turnips in court. Priests blessed harvests with holy water. And every autumn, the black market was basically just salad. It's amazing civilization survived long enough to invent potatoes. 25. The law against wearing armor indoors. In 1328, King Edward III got so sick of nobles showing up to Parliament dressed like they were headed to war that he outlawed armor in government buildings. Apparently, debates were getting a little too heated and stabby. The law stated that no man shall come before our council armed by sword, mail, or plate. Offenders were stripped of titles and fined for parliamentary intimidation. One duke argued that armor was his formal attire. The king replied that if your outfit includes chainmail, maybe diplomacy isn't your strength. It's the only workplace dress code in history designed to prevent decapitations. 26. The trial by cake. In one Italian village, a man accused of blasphemy was forced to prove his innocence by eating a consecrated cake. The catch? If he couldn't swallow it, he was guilty. It was believed that divine power would literally choke a liar. The accused man nervously choked on crumbs, so the court declared him damned and burned him for being bad at dessert. The logic was flawless. If you're innocent, you digest. If you're guilty, you become toast. Medieval justice basically worked on the same principle as a rigged cooking show. 27. The Don't Bury Vampires Regulation. In 12th century Eastern Europe, people were so terrified of the undead that towns issued official rules for vampire prevention. Gravediggers were legally required to bury suspected vampires face down, tie their hands, and sometimes place bricks in their mouths to prevent biting after resurrection. Some regions even taxed anti-vampire supplies, stakes, holy water, and garlic bundles. Imagine filing that on your medieval tax return. One hammer, 2 stakes, and an emotional support clove. And yes, the church approved it, because nothing says faith like a certified garlic receipt. 28. The Law of the Lucky Corpse. In 14th century Bohemia, funerals came with a side of gambling. Local superstition claimed that whoever carried the coffin's left handle would receive good luck for a year, so people started fighting over corpses. It got so violent that city councils passed laws assigning official coffin carriers by rotation. There are records of men bribing priests to reserve the lucky side. One even faked his own uncle's death to secure the blessing. Authorities finally outlawed the practice after multiple funerals turned into WWE matches. Medieval Europe, where even mourning came with a punchline. 29. The No Singing While Drunk Ordinance. Medieval taverns were wild. Think karaoke night without microphones or self-awareness. In 14th century York, England, local councils passed a law banning singing in a state of great drunkenness. The problem wasn't drinking, that was expected. It was bad singing. Too many patrons were turning Ave Maria into Ow My Ears. So if you got caught belting a tune while tipsy, the constable could fine you a week's wages or dunk you in the nearest horse trough. One innkeeper's logbook even notes, 3 fined for caterwauling past the 9th hour. Translation: they murdered a song so badly it became a crime scene. 30. The Trial of the Corpse. In 897 AD, Pope Stephen VI decided to put his dead predecessor on trial. Yes, an actual corpse. The body of Pope Formosus was dug up, dressed in papal robes, and seated on a throne while a full court session unfolded. The Pope's corpse was found guilty of perjury and stripped of his sacred garments, which, considering the circumstances, feels redundant. When the trial ended, they tossed the body in the Tiber River. This event was so infamous, it was literally called the Cadaver Synod. Medieval Rome, where even your afterlife could have a court date. 31. The Don't Walk Backwards Rule. In 15th century France, walking backward in public was outlawed because it was believed to invite the devil's attention. People thought reversing your steps reversed your soul. One chronicler tells of a man fined for retreating in an unholy manner after tripping over a cart. A few zealots took it further, banning backward glances during funerals, lest ghosts follow you home. It's as if superstition and choreography had a baby, and that baby ran local government. Somewhere in France, a guard probably shouted, "Walk straight or go to hell," and meant it literally. 32. The bread window tax. In 16th century England, home design met bureaucracy in the dumbest possible way. Towns began taxing houses based on the number of windows, a clever way to gauge wealth. But one region added a twist. Bread windows, small holes used by bakers to cool loaves, counted too. Bakers, furious at this carb-based taxation, started sealing their bakery windows with old dough to avoid inspection. Inspectors, suspecting fraud, began knocking on walls to sniff out stale bread. Thus began the most absurd cat-and-mouse game in fiscal history, the IRS versus sourdough. 33. The law of the invisible pig. In medieval France, trial by oath meant you could swear your innocence with witnesses. But one farmer found a loophole. Accused of stealing a neighbor's pig, he claimed the animal was invisible and therefore still in his possession. The court actually debated it. Witnesses were called to testify that they had not seen the invisible pig, which, legally speaking, was true. After hours of nonsense, the judge fined both men for mocking God's eyesight. Somewhere in that courtroom, humanity's collective IQ dropped 20 points. 34. The no dying without permission edict. In 17th century France, the small town of Le Lavandou passed a law forbidding residents from dying unless they had purchased a burial plot. It was meant to protest the church's refusal to approve a new cemetery, but the mayor made it legally binding. The decree literally read, "All persons are forbidden to die within the town's limits without a suitable plot." Violators, meaning corpses, were subject to prosecution. The mayor's logic: if bureaucracy can't bury you, it can at least threaten you. It's the only time in history when "I can't even die in peace" was a legal fact. 35. The law of the sacred fart. Yes, really. In a 13th century monastery, monks debated whether breaking wind during prayer was a sin or a miracle. After an especially thunderous incident during Vespers, the abbot issued a decree. Should a brother release wind in devotion, it shall not be counted against him if unintended. But a rival abbey disagreed, claiming loud farts disrupted the harmony of divine chant. The debate escalated until a bishop had to intervene, declaring it a matter best left to God's judgment. And so, the church accidentally created the world's first official policy on flatulence. Truly, divine inspiration comes in mysterious bursts. 36. The don't eat too much pie law. In 14th century England, Christmas was getting too festive. Town officials complained that the holiday feasts had turned into ungodly spectacles of gluttony, so they outlawed meat pies on Christmas Day. Apparently, stuffing pastry with meat was seen as luxurious excess. One chronicler wrote that citizens mourned the pie ban as they would a fallen knight. Of course, everyone ignored it. Bakers started calling their pies seasonal loaves. Peasants held secret mince missions in barns, and one mayor famously confessed to repeated and joyous pie crimes. The moral: when you try to legislate pastry, humanity rebels. 37. The law against pointy hats. In 15th century France, pointy hats were a big deal. The higher the cone, the higher the status. Nobles strutted around with headgear so tall they had to crouch through doors. The church, unimpressed, declared them towers of vanity and passed sumptuary laws capping hat height. Inspectors literally measured nobles' hats in the street. One duchess, furious at being fined, added a fake bird's nest on top to claim it was a religious symbol. When priests still objected, she doubled the height out of spite. If pettiness were an Olympic sport, medieval fashion would have swept the medals. 38. The Don't Bake on Thursdays decree. In 13th century France, bakers were required by law to stop baking on Thursdays, supposedly to prevent fires before the Sabbath. The real reason? The city guild wanted to control competition. Bakers who disobeyed were fined, shamed, and occasionally forced to eat their own burnt bread in public. One poor guy tried to bake secretly at night, but the smell gave him away. Locals followed the aroma and ratted him out. The punishment? A parade through town wearing a burnt loaf as a hat. Congratulations, sir. You've just been crowned the Yeast King of Regret. 39. The no whistling at the moon. Rule in 12th century Wales, whistling at the moon was banned. The belief was that it summoned demons, witches, or at least very confused wolves. The law came after a rash of moon accidents, including farmers falling into wells while howling at lunar spirits. Punishment was mild, a night in the stocks. But it came with an added humiliation. Everyone had to whistle at you as they passed. There's even a record of one man claiming he wasn't summoning demons, just practicing for the town choir. The judge's response? Then sing in daylight, fool. 40. The don't sleep too long mandate. In the 15th century, sleep was treated like a moral failing. French city laws encouraged double sleeping, 2 short naps instead of 1 full night, to keep workers alert. Sleeping through the night was considered slothful. Inspectors would patrol inns and dormitories at midnight to check if anyone had been asleep for too many hours. One lawmaker proudly claimed the city was the most awake in Europe, which makes sense because no one could ever get any sleep. Medieval wellness culture, powered by paranoia and chronic exhaustion. 41. The chicken executioner of Basel. In 1474, Switzerland, a chicken was put on trial for the unnatural crime of laying an egg shaped like a human head. The church declared it proof of witchcraft. The poor hen was given a full trial, found guilty, and burned at the stake, alongside her cursed egg. Witnesses reported the execution proceeded without resistance. This case was so famous it inspired other towns to prosecute suspicious livestock. Medieval justice didn't just jump the shark, it interrogated the chicken first. 42. The no laughter law. In 16th century Spain, one overly serious bishop outlawed laughter during Lent. Excessive mirth, he said, invites the devil to dine. The rule was enforced by priests who patrolled taverns and markets, ready to fine anyone caught giggling. People responded exactly how you'd expect, by laughing more. Entire towns started holding mock funerals for humor, where residents mourned their right to joke. Some even dressed skeletons in bishops' robes as a protest. The church eventually repealed the law after realizing suppressing laughter just made them the punchline. 43. The Don't Juggle Without a License Act. In 14th century England, street performers were treated like a contagious disease. Juggling, fire-eating, and acrobatics were banned unless you held an official license from the local guild. Why? Because unlicensed jugglers were accused of sorcery. One performer was arrested after levitating 3 apples, which, spoiler alert, was just juggling. The law was so strict that some towns required entertainers to perform in front of clergy first, to prove their tricks weren't demonic. Imagine applying for a permit that reads, Occupation, Juggler, Risk, Possession by Satan. Bureaucracy has never been so circus-themed. 44. The Law of the Singing Fish. In 15th century Poland, a fisherman was accused of witchcraft because his catch started singing hymns. Townsfolk gathered to hear a bucket of carp allegedly hum Ave Maria. The church declared the fish possessed and confiscated it for holy investigation. After 3 days, they discovered the miracle was just air trapped under the fish's scales. The fisherman was still fined for blasphemous seafood. That's right, this man was punished because his dinner burped musically. Medieval justice didn't just jump the shark, it exorcised the carp. 45. The no mirrors for peasants rule vanity was considered a sin, but only for the poor. Nobles had gold-framed mirrors, but peasants in parts of Germany were banned from owning any reflective surface larger than a spoon. Officials claimed mirrors made commoners too self-aware. In one case, a farmer's wife was fined for using a polished pan to check her hair before church. The irony? The law's author was known for carrying a silver mirror on a chain to reflect divine light. Translation: mirrors were fine if you could afford hypocrisy. 46. The Don't Kiss Your Cow Law. Switzerland, 1410. A local priest blamed a livestock epidemic on impure affection between peasants and their animals. The city council responded by outlawing all gestures of tenderness toward cattle. Yes, they literally banned cow kisses. Offenders were labeled beast befrienders and forced to parade through town wearing cowbells of shame. The law eventually expanded to include sheep, goats, and one tragically misunderstood donkey. Moral of the story: in medieval Switzerland, loving your cow was a crime, but taxing it wasn't. 47. The Law of the Dancing Plague. In 1518, Strasbourg faced one of history's strangest epidemics, a dancing plague. Hundreds of people started dancing uncontrollably in the streets for days. Believing it was divine punishment, local officials passed a law ordering more dancing. They hired musicians and opened dance halls, thinking the dancers would exhaust the demons. Instead, people collapsed, injured, or died, and the government literally shrugged, saying, "At least they obeyed the law." It's the only recorded time in history when a medical crisis was treated with a citywide rave. 48. The No More Miracles Mandate. By the late 1300s, England had so many fake miracles that the king banned them altogether. You needed a royal license to perform divine wonders. One farmer was caught selling holy mud that cured back pain, while another claimed his sheep bleated in Latin. When officials shut him down, he argued, "They only sing on Sundays." The king's decree made all unapproved miracles illegal, proving that even in the Middle Ages, bureaucracy could kill the magic. Literally. And there you have it. 48 absurd medieval laws that prove humanity peaked in stupidity centuries ago. From trial by cheese to tax-deductible vampires, it's a miracle civilization made it to Wi-Fi. Which one wins the crown for dumbest law? Tell me below, and pray it's still legal to laugh. Before you escape this video like a guilty politician, check out our other channel, Idiopedia. Even dumber, even funnier. You'll thank me later. You'll